Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today we'll be contrasting and comparing two different conspiracy theories, crop circles, and chemtrails. With me is Dr. John Alexander. He is the past president of the International Association for Near-Death Studies. He is also the author of Reality Denied, First-Hand Experiences with Things That Couldn't Happen, But Did. His other books include UFOs, Myths, Conspiracies, and Realities, and also Future War. Welcome, John.
Glad to be here, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be with you once again. And let's start with crop circles, because I know many people who have diverse opinions about crop circles. There are those who say it's all fraud, and there are others who say it's all done by UFOs. And I've even heard some people who say it's U.S. government spy satellites shooting down laser beams and creating crop circles. Most everybody has heard of crop circles, but I assume some of our viewers may not really know what they are. So perhaps it's best to start with a definition.
Well, a definition, I guess scientifically you call them agroglyphs. These are drawings that appear in crop areas that appear very quickly. Some of them are terribly complex. The people that you've described they're all wrong if they say all. But the point is, some of them are hoaxes, but some of them really defy common sense and logic and have been researched thoroughly. Mm-hmm.
And I gather they occur primarily in the United Kingdom.
Well, primarily, however, that said, they've been seen on many continents. They've been in North America, U.S., Canada. They've appeared in Japan and in Asia and in Australia. Mm-hmm. But one of the complexifications is that, the U.K. has about 87% of them.
Mm-hmm. And I guess they're sort of reminiscent of mythological, like fairy circles, or they almost seem reminiscent of the Stonehenge. They're typically circular.
Well, one of the misunderstandings is these became popular in the late 20th century. I believe the first one that's recorded is 1678. So the idea of showing in crops is called the mower's devil, has been around for a very, very long time.
I see. And do we know, well, for example, let's start with the ones that are created through some form of trickery or fakery. How does that work?
Well, in general, we don't know, and there's quite a problem. We know that there was a couple of guys called Doug and Dave who got out there and they had boards and strings, and they would stomp and
stomp down on the wheat.
Literally stomp down generally very crude circles. Mm-hmm. And what we know is, and anybody can go online and just Google crop circles, you see some of these are terribly, terribly complex. Yeah. Possible to fake them, yes. But on the other hand, some really defy explanation.
Mm-hmm. But the idea is there's a field, there's a crop like a wheat crop or oats or something.
Yeah, it's just something that's high enough so you can see it. Now, you did mention something earlier, like fairy circles and things like that. Yeah. There are fungi and things like that will inhibit crop growth, and it tends to look like a circle, but it's just a round circle. Mm-hmm. It's not these dramatic geometric designs that are clear in some of the most advanced crop circles.
Well, if I had some kind of a laser beam and a satellite, maybe even a laser weapon, I've seen, of course, designs you can get. Laser-created designs are extremely intricate. One might think a laser weapon could create a very intricate design quite quickly.
Well, A, would be very difficult to do. As you may have known, my last assignment in the military, I was Director of Advanced System Concepts, which included all of the tactical directed energy, which included microwaves and lasers. So understanding the state of the art, what you're describing, can it be done on a very small level, up close? Yes, under highly controlled conditions. The problem that you would have explaining it using laser weapons is, where'd you put them? I mean, we have heard, and often they say microwaves, because one of the things you should get into are the physical attributes that have been studied that are generally ignored by people who just look at the glyphs themselves. And you do see substantial changes in the makeup of the plants. So where would you put it? I might mention that one of the things that happened, I was contacted by Sir Ron Oxborough, who at the time was the chief scientific advisor for the UK, MOD in the UK. And he came to visit me. Long story, that didn't go very well because it turns out we were talking about non-lethal weapons. You want to talk about something else. But I was later back in London on a study, and he had gone to become a chancellor of a major engineering university there.
MOD, for our viewers who may not know, is the Ministry of Defense.
Correct. Well, we're talking the chief scientific advisor to the minister, who had interest. And he said, hey, we see these pictures here. One of the questions is it yours? And say, absolutely not. And said, we're going out and we have these pictures and just cannot explain. And part of the problem is the rapidity with which some of these are derived.
So let me just make sure we understand what you just said. The chief scientist reporting to the Minister of Defense in the United Kingdom has looked into crop circles and said they cannot be explained by conventional science.
Well, mostly he said, we don't know what they are. And it was one of the questions really across the pond is it you? Is the U.S. doing something?
Right.
And there are people who espouse that. My claim is that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The UK is one of our closest allies, part of NATO, but we have special alliances with the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. This would be an invasion, because one thing we haven't discussed yet is the effect on farmers. This is very detrimental. I mean, it does damage to crops, and it costs them money, and they are frankly very unhappy about crop circles appearing in their fields. So this would technically be an invasion of one of our closest allies. I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever.
Or minimally speaking, trespassing on private property.
Well, it is, using force, but I say most adversarial would be an invasion.
Right.
A real invasion.
Well, considering the number of crop circles.
Well, there's quite a few. And again, they appear in many places in the world, not limited to the UK.
No, but as you say, 87% in the UK. So I presume we're talking about many dozen at least.
Oh, yes. Probably hundreds to thousands by this time. And every year they tend to appear, of course, in the summer, because that's when the cereal crops have grown to the point where you can notice if they've been impacted.
Now, people who observe the crop circles, people of researchers or sometimes esoteric students, report being out in the fields when the crop circles are actually being made and seeing orbs of light hovering over the fields.
There are a number of stories. Sometimes, remember, the UK is often foggy. The reason they call it foggy London town. And there have been stories about things and them observing the field, particularly at night, and fog lifts, and here's a crop circle that wasn't there. And there are some videos of, as you said, orbs of light circling around over the field, and when it clears, sure enough, there's something there.
So what is your best understanding of what might be going on?
Well, I think there's two things that are going on. One we understand, that's called hoaxes.
Right.
And how they do it and the degree of complexity varies tremendously. But the other is a big really don't know. One of the things we've talked about is the Julia set.
Yeah.
And this dates to 7 July 1993. And the point is that we know just about when this was formed because a plane had flown over the area being just immediately south of Stonehenge. And there's a major highway, A303, that transits the area between Stonehenge and where this appeared. 45 minutes later, here is a huge glyph that's over 900 feet long, 500 feet wide, with 149 separate circles inside. Now, at 6 o'clock, this is, as I said, in July, so you get a lot of sunlight there. And an area that's highly transited. You have guards that are on Stonehenge because it's a national treasure. Nobody saw anything, and just suddenly there it is. So if you're going to say it was hoaxers who moved in, it would take, several hundred to get in and do that much in that period of time.
Right. So I suppose it's fair to assume that when it comes to these very complex crop circles made in a relatively short period of time with good observers around in broad daylight, hoaxing seems extremely unlikely.
Correct. Now, and by the way, hoaxing has been tested. Discovery Channel had and there's been a couple others that have actually had contests on how to build circles. A mutual friend of ours, Jim Schnabel, was involved in that, and they were able to get some pretty complex design. Problem was they're small. It took them hours to do it, and relatively small, nothing near the size that we're talking about or the complexity of some of these.
Well, it would seem to me that given the complexity of the designs and the unknown nature of how these crop circles are formed, that it might be an effort at communication from some sort of a hyperdimensional source.
Well, that's certainly one of the major hypotheses. And the question then becomes, what's the message?
Yeah.
Many of these, the one I mentioned, Julia said, you've had the Mandelbrot set, various kinds of designs that are known that are showing up.
The communication seems to be mathematical.
That's the best guess, but nobody, as far as I know, has been able to come up with, and the answer is, or the question is, what is being transferred, other than something has the ability to communicate and present these very interesting mathematical designs.
It would suggest to me that let's just say an invisible entity is saying, hi there, I'm an invisible entity and I'm very sophisticated. I have mathematical knowledge and I'm trying to communicate to you.
Of course, then the question is, why the UK specifically? Now, as I said, around Stonehenge and that has mystical powers that goes back centuries, obviously. We do know that there's areas around the world where we have concentrations of various kinds of phenomena.
Now, when you say mystical powers associated with Stonehenge, what do you have in mind?
Well, this is... Again, if you go back to the Druids, to the people who created Stonehenge, again, you're also into mythology. And they're still finding out more and more about Stonehenge and wondering how it was built. You end up with very, very big stones lifted to quite a height. You wonder what's the technical capability of doing that. There are people who say, no, we understand it and when it was formed. But again, that's a whole separate discussion, if you will. But it's interesting, again, that this is an area that was considered sacred for centuries, and we're now seeing it. Now, they're not all concentrated in that immediate area, but that seems to be one that has a high density of these events. But again, that does not explain the U.S., Canada, Japan, Australia. What I've not heard, but would be of interest, is of any in either African continent or South America.
Would you say that the designs are as complex elsewhere in the world as they've found in the UK?
Some are, but in fairness, the most complex ones have certainly been in the UK.
Mm-hmm. So it would suggest to me minimally that some entity, some conscious entity is trying to alert us to a mystery.
And again, that's certainly a possibility, and from the crop circle enthusiasts, that's one of the most popular ones.
Yeah.
And of course, the question then always becomes, okay, what do you say other than hi? Mm-hmm. Is there some other sort of information? Remember what we did with Voyager, sending out the symbols that we run out? That was all mathematically designed, hoping that if it ran into an intelligent society out there someplace, that they would understand math and be able to figure out from that, we're the third planet from the sun where this originated and what humans and male and female look like. And that was all based on mathematics, assuming that math is the standard language or would be a standard language as cultures develop.
Yeah. Well, I guess at this point it's fair to say that the crop circles represent an unsolved mystery and possibly even a conspiracy of some sort.
Well, I don't think a conspiracy. I think there's another piece that's missing. We tend to look at the glyphs themselves and say this is transmitting information. A lot of what is ignored in the study is a fair amount of research, and BLT is one research company that was involved in looking at changes that take place, where they look at, the crops. There are nodes, again, with the crop, where it buckles, and they are expanded. Some of them look like, and they've found instances of radiation. It looks like it's been irradiated. So that is what led to the question about, is it a microwave system or something? I would reject that it's a human microwave system, but that they've been irradiated seems to be pretty clear.
Well, another piece of the puzzle.
Yes, and again, part of the problem with the skeptics, if you will, is they will concentrate on one part of the observation and say, if we know. And again, we've got to remember that a substantial number are hoaxes. Yeah. And one of my comments in this area and others, the hoaxes are not benign. Because in this case, I think what you're doing is covering up real phenomena that deserves to be studied, and we don't understand that very well. So then you have to get in and sort out, saying, okay, what's hoax and what's not. I might mention that when the Discovery Channel tried their experiment, and they brought in people from MIT, math students, and said, okay, we want you to build, and you've got a specific period of time. We're going to do it at night. But they gave them weeks to prepare so they could go through and think this through. It was not a spur of the moment kind of thing. And the bottom line was, when you came away, it was a design, but looked like a bunch of guys tromping around in the weeds out there. And
of the known hoaxes, how large were they? How complex were they?
Yeah, most of them are pretty small by comparison.
But let's take the largest. How large was the largest? How complex was the most complex? Okay.
But again, it depends on how many people are going to be involved. As I said, most of these occur at night, sometimes under not best weather conditions. You get into problems of how did you get into the field. And if you look at these pictures, you'll see the lines, where the tractors have gone, developing it. One of the things that the farmers are particularly upset about is people get in there. It not only upsets the crop, but it upsets the soil and makes it more difficult for them to regenerate their crops. A lot of unhappy people with this. A few of them have figured out they can get a little bit of money by charging, and you'll see signs out there, come see the best crop circles and things like that. But it does not compensate for the loss or the damage done to the crops themselves.
Oh, okay. Do you think there's any connection between the crop circles in the United Kingdom and the designs that are found elsewhere?
Oh, most likely. But again, we're back to the question of, okay, is there some intelligent entity source that is orchestrating this? And why there? Why do they look in the kind of the manner that they do? And again, I have not seen the level of complexity generally in the other countries.
All right, well, why don't we move on and talk about another conspiracy theory, that of chemtrails. And that's where people who look at what conventional aviation would call a contrail, a vapor trail following a jet airplane in a high altitude, ice crystals are formed and they remain in the atmosphere for a while, and we see those in the sky. But there are various conspiracy theorists who maintain that this is some sort of nefarious plot to spray chemicals into the atmosphere for different purposes.
Correct. And it does not make a lick of sense. And yet we have friends who are very intelligent, who are, firm believers that something is in fact going on, that the government is involved. The reasons vary. One of them is depopulation, that what this is going to do is to decrease sperm count so that the population will decrease over time. It's like an aerial vaccination. The weather modification techniques. It said if that's one, that's certainly not working very well. And that therein lies one of the big problems with the crop circles, is to what end. And you certainly don't see evidence of any positive outcome, even if you accept the conspiracy. You say it's not happening. Population's still going up, weather's still changing. Doesn't make sense.
Well, let's just look at the feasibility of it, though. It's always struck me as rather unfeasible that some sort of massive conspiracy, which apparently would include multiple countries, would be involved in spraying the atmosphere with toxic chemicals.
Yeah, you end up requiring literally tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people to have been involved. And you'd have to have pilot. Now, if you start by assuming that if something is put into fuel, so that you get the normal dispersion, as opposed to, I need extra aircraft to go out and do this with, like normal spraying techniques and that. You'd have pilots involved. You'd have the whole logistical chain. How do you get it in there? You'd have if it was a fuel derivative, it would certainly be of constraint, because they test aviation fuel all the time, and any contaminants is of grave concern to them. So the number of people would be, just beyond belief that you would get that number who would keep this massive secret. A few years ago, I was in out areas of Bhutan, a country that's not visited very much. And this was in the Himalayas, and it's a very sparsely populated area. And I actually took pictures of chemtrail over there, say, if this was to do something, to the population, there aren't even any people there.
Well, let's look at some of the legitimate reasons why airplanes might be spraying some sort of chemicals into the air. We know, for example, it happens with crop dusting. It sometimes happens with various rainmaking, seeding, cloud seeding for purposes of rainmaking. It's not totally unheard of.
Not totally, but remember, these people are talking about something that's near universal. We're talking about controlling continents. Had dinner recently with a couple, again, well-educated, and they say, did you see the crops or the chemtrails tonight? We saw that, and then all of a sudden the clouds came in. He goes, no, we're talking about traditional weather patterns. It was not something that changed. But adamant believers, and when you challenge them as to, particularly for what purpose, it sort of falls apart just for the are there ways things to do that? controlling weather is relatively small,
I understand that on occasion the Atmospheric and Oceanic Administration will spray barium into the atmosphere for purposes of measuring wind currents.
Yeah. Well, but again, we're talking about massive amounts that would be necessary to understand the chemtrails. We're not talking about periodic droppings and that.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that on their side that did catch a lot of attention is that a number of years ago, there was an Air Force. It wasn't a study. It was actually kind of a think piece proposal that talked about weather modification as a major piece of future warfare.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people don't know that we actually have treaties against major weather modification. That if you're going to do this, even the things that you described, silver iodide or something of that nature for precipitation, you have to file complete plans and go through tremendous machinations before you do it. Because remember, when you do cloud seeding and you precipitate rain, yes, it does precipitate, but that means it doesn't rain someplace else. So you have to take that into consideration. You're not creating new rain. You're just causing the liquid to precipitate at a specific point.
Yeah, because I have heard that someone at one point analyzed, I don't know how, the chemical composition of the chemtrails and found that there was barium and other toxic chemicals. In fact, someone said it's coal ash or coal, I think the refuse from coal mining.
Well, but remember, there's an awful lot of that that's in the air itself. This has been one of the problems. If you look at, in what's happening with global weather patterns, one of the problems is we're getting dust from the Gobi Desert that comes all the way and precipitates in the U.S. and all the way to Europe. So you have a lot of particulate that's already in the atmosphere, and anything coming down will pick that up and drop it down.
And there's also quite a bit of radiation now in the atmosphere from Fukushima, and
there's some, yes.
Not to mention
again,
the
those
ocean.
things are well known and can be tracked. That is very different from a government conspiracy that every airplane that goes up there is going to deposit some kind of nefarious chemicals or toxic chemicals to do something.
So in a nutshell, I suppose it's fair to say that based on your analysis, the conspiracy theory regarding chemtrails doesn't seem to hold up, but the mystery regarding crop circles seems very real.
That's pretty fair. I would say if people want to study the chemtrail, there is a Harvard group called the Keith Group that follows this and comes out with a very prosaic answer, but they've addressed many of these issues, so it can give you the scientific explanations for this.
Well, Dr. John Alexander, once again, a very informative discussion from a person who is very knowledgeable about areas that most people don't explore. So congratulations on looking deeply into these areas. I think this is important information to share with people because there's so much confusion.
It also borders on broader issues on how people think and how their belief systems change. I think this is the more important area for research.
Yeah, and because conspiracy theories and various mysteries are out there everywhere, it's very useful for people to have analytical tools to begin to think through these things.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, thank you once again for being with me.
Thank you.
And thank you for being with us.